Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight we immerse ourselves in Edwardian London's glittering concert halls, where soprano Cora Lyle's farewell performance ends not with applause, but with her mysterious disappearance. Join us for Where the Music Ended. A symphony of deception and drama crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor. Though this melody plays on our own strings. Before we begin, share in the comments. Where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the overture begin. Chapter 1. A Song, Cut Short. It is a singular thing how often my dear friend Hercule Poirot and I have found ourselves caught in the web of mystery and murder by the most trivial of invitations. One moment we are enjoying an uneventful evening, and the next we are seated in a gilt-lined box at the Royal Albert Hall, watching the final curtain fall on a performance that would lead, though we did not yet know it, to one of the most curious disappearances London has ever seen. Fate so often chooses the most elegant occasions to set her darker threads into motion. I suppose that is her idea of irony, to plant the seed of tragedy among champagne glasses and satin slippers. In this particular instance, the setting was the farewell concert of Madame Cora Lyle, one of the great voices of the Edwardian age, and as flamboyant a personality as ever graced the London stage. I had received the invitation by post that morning. It bore the gold-embossed seal of the IIR Royal Opera Society and a handwritten note from a friend of mine, Lord Wincham, who fancied himself something of a patron of the arts. "Bring your brilliant little Belgian," the note had said, "and do try to look impressed. Cora is in rare form these days." Lord Wincham and I had served together briefly during the war, though his talents leaned more toward diplomacy than battlefield strategy. Now retired from any official post, he occupied himself with opera galas, charitable luncheons, and the occasional scandalous rumor. He was a man of charm, wit, and, if one were to believe the whispers, an exceptional talent for matchmaking, though whether that applied to romance or mischief, I could not always be sure. I passed it to Poirot over breakfast, where he sat meticulously peeling an orange, not with a knife, but with a thin silver fruit spoon. He insisted it was more precise. "An opera?" he asked, raising a single eyebrow. "Do you think, mon ami, that the high seas can ever be as dangerous as the low whisper?" "I think we both deserve a quiet night," I said. "No corpses, no international jewel thieves, just music, applause, and perhaps a well-dressed crowd." "Allures," he sighed. "Very well. But I shall bring my opera glasses, not for the performance, but in case someone tries to steal the conductor's watch." He was, of course, joking. At least I believed so at the time. That evening we arrived at the Royal Albert Hall to find the place brimming with society. It was the sort of audience that wears diamonds like punctuation and knows each other's secrets before the first curtain rises. Poirot and I were shown to a private box which Lord Wincham had generously reserved. The man himself met us in the II vestibule before the show. He was a tall, silver-haired gentleman with impeccable tailoring and a mischievous glint in his eye. "Hastings, Poirot, splendid," he said, clasping our hands warmly. "You're in for a treat tonight. Cora's been rehearsing like the devil. Says she wants to go out on a note that makes the chandeliers rattle. And between you and me, I think she just might." Poirot smiled. It is always intriguing when a performer chooses their final bow. Often, it is the encore that reveals their true character. "She has character enough for 10 women," Wincham chuckled. "Come, I've placed you in my personal box. Best sightlines. In the house, and close enough to see the glint in Cora's eye." The woman of the hour, Madame Cora Lyle, appeared promptly at 8. Her entrance drew a hush across the vast hall, the kind of silence money cannot buy and fame cannot command, but which belongs to something rarer still, genuine theatrical charisma. She was a vision of crimson silk and ostrich feathers, her hair piled high like a Grecian statue, and her voice, her voice. Even I, a military man with no particular taste for the operatic, was struck by its force and clarity. Her final aria left the audience in stunned silence for a full breath before the applause erupted like a thunderclap. "She reminds me," I whispered to Poirot, "of a lioness in diamonds." "Pah," he muttered. "She reminds me of a volcano with a temper." After the performance, we were ushered into the after-party, a grand affair held in the marble drawing rooms of Lord Wyncham's Kensington home. It was, as expected, full of lace, laughter, and lingering perfume. Waiters flitted about like butterflies bearing trays of champagne. I recognized several society figures, a duchess, a newspaper magnate, a rising actress rumored to be in the midst of a scandal. But all were pale shadows compared to the storm. At the center of it all, Madame Lyle. Lord Wyncham himself was the perfect host, gliding through the crowd with a word for everyone. "She may be a diva," he said to me in an aside, watching Cora hold court in a swirl of admirers, "but she's our diva. If half the rumors are true, this will be the last peaceful evening she has for some time." She was radiant, triumphant, and already halfway into her second glass of champagne when she spotted us. "Ah, the detective!" she called, her voice resonating, even above the chatter. "Come here, Monsieur Poirot. Tell me, are murderers really as obvious as the newspapers make them out to be, or are the clever ones simply never caught?" Poirot smiled and offered a courteous bow. "Madame, I find that the cleverest murderers often trip over their own vanity." "How frightfully dull for them," she replied, her eyes gleaming. "Do you dance, monsieur?" "Alas, I leave the dancing to my friend Hastings. He is more graceful than I." "Nonsense!" I protested. Cora laughed and took my arm anyway, spinning me half a step across the marble floor before releasing me again. "If I weren't retiring," she declared loudly, "I'd have written, 'A part for you, a gallant officer who saves the soprano from a poisoned glass.'" "Surely," I replied gallantly, "you'd save yourself." From the edge of the room, a man coughed politely. Cora turned. "Ah, forgive me. My husband, Dr. Lionel Crispin." He stepped forward, a pale man with a neatly trimmed mustache and the air of one forever apologizing for existing. He was perhaps in his late 40s, with the build of a sedentary man and a pair of spectacles that sat low on his nose. His handshake was limp. "Charmed," he said quietly. "Forgive my wife. She thrives on attention." "Don't we all, darling?" she said brightly, and turned back to her audience. There was a moment of quiet as he stepped back into the shadow behind her. Poirot's eyes lingered. Later that evening, as we were making our way to the car, I couldn't help but remark, "Crispin seemed an odd match for someone like her." "He is the shadow to her spotlight," Poirot said. "A man does not mind shrinking if he is sheltered. But when the shelter becomes the storm, then he must choose whether to run or resist. You don't think—" No, I think nothing yet. But Madame Lyle is a woman of fire. And fire," he added, adjusting his gloves, "does not always extinguish itself peacefully." Soon after, we excused ourselves. The hour was late and the room had grown too warm. As we stepped outside, a thin London fog had begun to settle. I buttoned my coat and glanced back at the golden windows of the drawing room. "She's quite the character," I said. "What a life! Scandal, talent, beauty. I suppose now she'll go to the Riviera or Rome and write her memoirs." Poirot shook his head. "Non, Hastings. That woman is not ready for quiet. She still enjoys too much the attention of others. The spotlight, yes, but also the drama." "You think she'll return to the stage?" "No, mon ami, I think she will not leave it at all." The remark puzzled me, but I was used to Poirot's odd little comments. I did not think of it again, not until 4 days later, when the headlines shouted across London papers, "Opera star vanishes. No trace of Cora Lyle. Husband claims she left in the night. Theaters in shock." And that, dear reader, is where our story truly began. Chapter 2. A Gentleman's Alibi. I cannot say with any degree of scientific certainty what causes one to wake at a particular moment with a sense that something is not quite as it should be. But when I opened the Times that morning and saw Cora Lyle's photograph staring back at me above the headline, "Opera star vanishes. No trace of Cora Lyle," a peculiar shiver ran down my spine. It was not the chill of surprise, but rather that strange ripple one feels when the pieces of a puzzle, long dormant, begin to stir. Poirot was already at the breakfast table when I descended. He was as ever immaculate, the creases in his trousers so sharp one might slice toast with them, and his egg cut into perfect eighths, which he ate in clockwise order. "You've seen it, I take it?" I said, tossing the paper beside his cup. "Oui," he murmured without looking up, "though the story contains more smoke than fire thus far." "She simply vanished," I exclaimed. "No note, no luggage, missing nothing but her husband's word that she left of her own accord. Doesn't that strike you as rather thin?" Poirot finally glanced up. "Thin? Yes. But often the thinnest tale reveals the most texture when examined closely." He tapped the newspaper. "Dr. Crispin states she departed in the night, leaving him asleep. That he awoke to find her dressing room empty and her trunks untouched. He doesn't exactly look the sort to inspire dramatic elopements," I said dryly, "unless she ran off with his spectacles." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "Come, Hastings, let us not underestimate the power of the unremarkable. Often the most dangerous snakes are those mistaken for garden worms." It was true that Dr. Lionel Crispin inspired little in the way of either admiration or suspicion, until now. And yet, as I recalled that evening at Wincham's, I remembered the way he had stood behind Cora, quiet, watchful, almost entirely erased from the scene. A man who lived in shadows and perhaps had learned how to wield them. Before noon, we had been summoned by no less a figure than Inspector James, who met us at Scotland Yard with his usual briskness and a pot of particularly dreadful tea. "Gentlemen," he began, "I don't need to tell you that the press is frothing. A vanished diva. Society is beside itself. I've got 4 reporters downstairs already asking whether the Russians were involved." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And were they?" James snorted. "Not unless they smuggled her out in a cello case." He handed us a copy of Crispin's initial statement. It was brief, colorless, and utterly uninspired. Claimed she couldn't sleep. Said she'd go for a walk to clear her head. Apparently, that was not unusual for her. She liked to take nighttime air in their garden, but this time, she never came back. "Was there a gate left open?" I asked. "Locked. Their driver says the car wasn't taken. Neighbors heard nothing, and no sightings since." Poirot tapped his chin, thoughtfully. "Tell me, mon ami, did you speak to Lord Wincham?" James nodded. Cooperative, if a bit dramatic. Said she was in good spirits at the party. No signs of distress or nerves. But here's where it gets odd. Her maid insists Madame packed a valise the day before the concert. Small one, gone now. Husband claims to know nothing of it. Poirot and I exchanged a glance. A packed bag and a vanishing act do seem to suggest planning, I said. But then why leave her jewels behind? James leaned back. Exactly. Nothing of real value missing. Just that bag, a pair of gloves, and her silver cigarette case. And Dr. Crispin? Poirot inquired. James grimaced. We had a quiet word. No signs of struggle in the home. No blood, no broken glass. Man's nervous, but that's to be expected. Claims he went straight to bed after they returned from the gala. Didn't even stay up for his usual cocoa. No alibi, of course, but no clear motive either. No clear motive, Poirot repeated, is not the same as no motive. From that moment, the good doctor became, in my eyes, the most obvious of suspects. We paid him a visit that very afternoon. The Crispin townhouse in Belgravia was respectable, neat, and just a trifle mournful. It was not difficult to imagine a woman of fire feeling caged within those walls. Dr. Crispin greeted us with the soft gloom of a man trapped in the middle of an unfolding scandal. He looked thinner than I remembered, and his fingers trembled, slightly as he poured tea. I could not help noticing the scratches, faint but fresh, along his right wrist. From the cat, he murmured, noticing my glance. Cora's Persian. It has not taken well to her absence. Few of us have, Poirot said quietly. Tell me, doctor, was Madame Lyle unhappy? Crispin sighed long and slow. She was restless. She had the idea she would retire, write a book, perhaps travel. But I think she feared irrelevance more than she feared the stage. She liked attention. She needed it. And did she often leave the house at night? Occasionally. She said the air helped her think. And did you hear her go? No, Crispin said, rubbing his forehead. I woke around 5. Her side of the bed was empty. I thought nothing of it at first. She often slept in her dressing room, but she wasn't there. I checked the garden, the guest room, the parlor. Then I called the police. His answers were calm, but lacked conviction. He had the air of a man reciting a part for which he had never quite learned the lines. Poirot glanced at a portrait above the fireplace, a striking likeness of Cora in full costume. She was a woman of strong temperament, he said. Did she make enemies? Crispin flinched slightly. Cora made impressions. Some admired her, some didn't. Was there another man? No. The reply was so quick and sharp that it startled even me. Then, softer. At least I don't think so. Poirot rose. Merci, doctor. You have been most accommodating. As we left the house, I said, You don't believe him, do you? No, said Poirot, stepping into the sunshine. But that does not mean he is lying. A man may speak the truth and still reveal nothing. We were silent for a moment. Then I said, Do you think she's dead? Poirot gave me a strange look. Dead, perhaps. But if so, mon ami, it was not by his hand. A man like Crispin does not plan. He endures. If he killed, it was not premeditated. Then who? Poirot's gaze drifted upward, thoughtful. There are many who love the light that Cora cast. But where there is light, there is also shadow. Look not to the obvious, Hastings. Look to those who disappear when she enters the room. Chapter 3. A hint of powder and paint. If there is one truth I have learned during my many adventures with Hercule Poirot, it is this. A disappearance can be more unsettling than a murder. A body may speak volumes, but an empty space says nothing, and into that silence rush all manner of speculation. By the following morning, Cora Lyle's photograph had adorned no fewer than 5 newspaper covers. The Daily Chronicle called it the vanishing voice. One headline even dared suggest she had faked her own disappearance for publicity, that I found rather tasteless, and Poirot, reading it over his second croissant, merely murmured, "Bah, the English press always with the wrong kind of drama." Later that day, we received a note delivered by hand and written on thick lavender paper in a sweeping feminine script. Monsieur Poirot. There is something I must tell you, but I dare not speak of it in the open. If you are discreet, meet me at the Palette Room at precisely 4 bar today. I shall be in the corner booth wearing violet gloves. Yours, a friend of Cora. Naturally, we went. The Palette Room was an elegant place off Regent Street, all etched glass and white linen, the kind of establishment where secrets could be sweetened with sugar cubes. Promptly at 4, Poirot and I entered, and there, in the corner booth as promised, sat a woman in violet gloves. She was not young, perhaps in her late 40s, and her figure was a little too statuesque for fashion. But she had a kind of faded glamour, as if she had once played a duchess on stage and never quite stepped out of the role. She introduced herself as Miss Allegra Montrose. "I was Cora's dresser for nearly 12 years, she said, stirring her tea with a hand that trembled ever so slightly. Backstage, nobody saw her as I did, and I can tell you now, she did not run away." Poirot leaned forward. "You are certain of this, mademoiselle?" "Of course I am," she said fiercely. Cora adored attention, but she feared obscurity even more. She wouldn't have vanished unless someone made her. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Then let us begin with a simple question. Who hated her enough to make her disappear?" Allegra paused. "No one hated her, monsieur. But she had enemies. Every star does. Other sopranos, a few journalists, even a conductor she humiliated in Milan. And in her private life?" The woman's lips tightened. "She had her affairs. Nothing. Scandalous. She was discreet, but there was one in particular, a young man, a tenor, very handsome, very intense. Name?" Allegra hesitated. "Julian Falk. He sang opposite her in Ada 2 seasons ago. He was obsessed. When she ended it, he made a scene in the wings. Roses thrown to the floor, shouting the whole bit. Lord Wincham had to have him barred from rehearsals. Poirot's expression did not change, but I could feel the sudden alertness behind his eyes. Was she frightened of him? Not that she showed. But she did have a letter from him once, unhinged, begging her to run away with him. I think she kept it, said she might use it in her memoirs. And her husband, did he know? Oh, Dr. Crispin always knew more than he let on. Stillwater's that one. He acted the mild, obedient husband. But Cora once told me, Lionel is not weak. My dear, he's quiet. There's a difference. When we had thanked Miss Montrose and stepped back into the street, I turned to Poirot. So, a jealous lover, a jealous husband, and a bag that vanished before she did. It's starting to sound like a proper opera plot. Poirot nodded. Yes, but with one crucial detail missing. What's that? He smiled. The false note. We returned to Lord Wincham's house that evening by invitation, the party now gone. The grandeur seemed faded. Wincham greeted us in his dressing gown, brandy in hand. I still can't believe it, he muttered, pacing. Cora, gone. I keep expecting her to sweep in with some outrageous excuse. Poirot accepted a glass but did not drink. Tell me, my lord, this Julian Falk, would you say he is dangerous? Wincham looked surprised. Falk? Good heavens, no. Arrogant, yes. A bit melodramatic, but not violent. Was he at the after-party? No. He wasn't invited, and he wouldn't have come. He hated being reminded he was no longer in her circle. Poirot nodded, then turned toward the grand piano where a small silver frame sat. I hadn't noticed it before. In it was a photograph of Cora, signed in a bold, looping hand. She gave you this? Poirot asked. Wincham smiled wistfully. A farewell gift. Said she was turning the page, but wanted me to know she'd had the time of her life. His voice faltered, and he took a sip of brandy. A short time later, Poirot excused us, claiming fatigue. But once outside, he did not summon a cab. Instead, he said quietly, "There is something very wrong about this picture." I glanced back at the house. You mean Lord Wincham? No, Hastings. I mean the photograph. Signed, dated Tuesday, but Madame Lyle disappeared Monday night. I froze. Good Lord. Poirot's voice grew soft. So either the photograph is a forgery, or... Cora was still alive after her husband claimed she vanished. We stood in silence, then Poirot added, "Tomorrow we visit the opera house. I suspect the next clue lies not in her home, but in her dressing room, in the world of grease, paint, shadows, and rivalry. The stage, Hastings, conceals many things." Chapter 4. The Dressing Room Door. The next morning dawned gray and uncertain, as though London itself hesitated to reveal anything clearly. Fog curled along the pavements like a cat, reluctant to be disturbed, and even Poirot, ever precise, appeared slightly out of sorts. His usual breakfast ritual, the symmetrical slicing of toast, the perfectly placed butter, was abandoned after one glance at the Times, where the story of Cora Lyle's disappearance had now taken on the tone of a sordid melodrama. "She is not a ghost, Hastings," he muttered irritably, brushing crumbs from his immaculate lapel. "And yet the journalists write as if she has vanished into mist, leaving only her perfume behind." "She might as well have," I said. "No note, no witnesses. And now that signed photograph turning up a day after she allegedly disappeared." "You don't still suspect her husband?" Poirot arched one eyebrow. "Dr. Crispin is an obvious suspect. Too obvious. That does not absolve him, but it obliges me to look harder at those who remain comfortably in the shadows." He placed his napkin on the table with ceremonial finality. "Come, mon ami. We go to the theater." The Royal Opera House was not yet open to the public, but a quiet word from Poirot and a glimpse of his card gained us entry. We were met in the lobby by the assistant manager, a nervous man named Mr. Welby, who clutched his clipboard like a life raft. "Terrible business, gentlemen. Terrible," he said in a hushed voice. "She was a pillar of this institution. Difficult, yes, but brilliance is often edged with thorns. This way." He led us down corridors that echoed with the ghosts of applause, to the backstage wing and a small dressing room at the end of a narrow passage. A faded gold star was still affixed to the door. "No one's touched a thing," Welby said, unlocking it with a key that jangled faintly. "Police said they'd be back today, but I'm sure they won't mind you having a look." Poirot stepped in slowly, eyes narrowing. I followed, and for a moment I felt as though we had stepped inside a mausoleum. The scent of powder and violet water still lingered in the air. The room was rich with feminine detail. Long silk scarves draped over the mirror, a collection of opera glasses inlaid with mother of pearl, a scattering of sheet music. A dressing gown of peacock blue hung from a hook, still bearing the imprint of her shoulders. Poirot approached the vanity and carefully lifted a silver-topped atomizer. "Lily of the valley," he murmured. "Too delicate for a woman like Cora. A gift, perhaps." He turned to Mr. Welby. "She had no performances scheduled yet. This room looks ready for her return. Was she in the habit of keeping it prepared?" The man nodded. "Madam insisted on it. Said inspiration could strike any day. She might vanish for a week, then suddenly want the lights on and tea made in 10 minutes. We indulged her." "And was she here the day before she disappeared?" "Yes. She stopped in late Sunday. Said she was dropping off new music and meeting someone. Wouldn't say who." Poirot turned toward me. "Someone she did not wish to be seen with, perhaps. Someone from her past. Or her future." He moved toward Io, the mirror, and gently lifted a piece of sheet music. Underneath it was a calling card. He held it up between 2 fingers. Ah, the little gray cells stirred a life. The card read, "Julian Falk, Tenor Grand Palais de Geneville." There was no message, but the implication was clear. We stepped back out into the hall. "I think it is time we spoke with this Julian Falk," Poirot said. "But not here. Not while he might prepare his story. No, I would prefer to surprise him." It did not take long to learn that Julian Falk had been staying at a small hotel near Bloomsbury. Not grand, but fashionable enough for a visiting performer. We arrived without announcement. The concierge hesitated. "Mr. Falk hasn't been seen since Monday evening?" Poirot blinked. "You are certain?" "Yes, sir. He left with a suitcase. Seemed in a state, if I may say so. Said something about needing inspiration." Poirot's fingers drummed the counter. "Did he leave a forwarding address?" The man shook his head. "No, sir. Just a note for the laundry." Poirot turned away. "Come, Hastings, the net is widening, but not evenly." Back at our flat that evening, Poirot did not pace. He sat instead in his armchair, fingertips pressed together, eyes closed, thinking. I knew better than to interrupt. I busied myself with the paper. It was there I saw it, a small item in the arts section. Private concert at Wincham House for foreign dignitary. Sources suggest music to include unpublished works of Madame Cora Lyle. I read it aloud. Poirot opened one eye. "Ah, now that is most interesting." "What is it?" "Lord Wincham, in his grief, has found occasion to profit from her legacy." "You don't think—" Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. But we must be wary. There is too much performance in this case, too much that is rehearsed." He stood and adjusted his cuffs. "Tomorrow we return to the beginning. There is something I have missed, something absurdly small but out of place." "What is it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I do not know. That is why we must look again. As any stage magician will tell you, the trick is not in the disappearance, but in the misdirection." Chapter 5. The Rival Note. The following morning, I awoke to the unmistakable sounds of Poirot humming to himself in a minor key, an ominous sign. He was seated at the breakfast table, not eating, but rearranging lumps of sugar into geometric patterns with surgical precision. "You have a theory," I said, still groggy. "No, mon ami," he replied. "I have a thread. And threads, when pulled carefully, often unravel entire tapestries. But this thread, it came from a voice. I blinked. A voice? He tapped a spoon against his cup. You remember the photograph that arrived late and the calling card from Julian Falk? Of course. Well, I have learned this morning that Monsieur Falk was once engaged to another singer in London, a certain Miss Ivy Milan. The name meant nothing to me, but Poirot saw my confusion and continued. She was once a promising soprano, a student. Of Cora, in fact. But something changed. She has not been heard on a public stage in over a year. Professional jealousy or something more personal. They say Cora was like a flame, beautiful, captivating, but capable of burning those who came too near. Perhaps Miss Milan bears such a burn. We found Miss Milan not far from Covent Garden, living in a small but tasteful flat that overlooked a quiet square. She received us in a rose-colored sitting room with music scores scattered artfully across. A piano. She was in her late 20s, I guessed, delicate-featured, with chestnut hair and a voice that carried the kind of soft defiance one finds in those who have been hurt, but will not admit it. Cora is missing, she said coolly, pouring tea without offering us sugar. But she's always disappearing, isn't she? Especially when there's applause to be stolen. You knew her well, mademoiselle? Poirot asked gently. I was her protégé for a time, until she decided there was only room on the stage for one soprano. And naturally, it had to be her. Poirot inclined his head. And your fiancé, Julian Falk, he too was redirected. Her cup paused midair. Julian and I were over before he met her, or rather, we were over because he met her. You may draw your conclusions. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And were you in touch with either of them recently? No, she said too quickly. I mean, not directly. I may have heard that Julian was in town, but we didn't speak. And as for Cora, I haven't seen her since last spring. Poirot said nothing for a moment, then stood. Merci, mademoiselle. That is all for now. She smiled politely, but her hand trembled slightly as she returned the cup to its saucer. Outside, Poirot was uncharacteristically quiet. Only once we had rounded the corner did he speak. She is lying, of course. You're certain, my dear Hastings? Her voice gave her away, not the words. A woman who can sing pitch perfect cannot tremble on a simple statement of truth unless she is rehearsing a lie. You think she's involved? Poirot tilted his head. I think she knows more than she admits. Perhaps she resented Cora. Perhaps she envied her. But envy, Hastings, envy does not kill alone. It needs provocation. That evening we returned once more to Wincham House under the pretense of delivering a personal letter from Poirot to Lord Wincham. In truth, Poirot wished to observe the preparations for the private concert rumored in the papers. The music room was being staged like a chapel. Velvet chairs, candlelight, and prominently displayed the unpublished scores of Madame Lyle Lord. Wincham was there giving instructions to a young pianist and inspecting wine glasses with theatrical fastidiousness. He greeted us warmly. Poirot, Hastings, still sleuthing, are we? You've just missed the most delightful rehearsal. Young Ivy. Milan is performing one of Cora's Never Heard. It's Heartbreak in a Melody. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Miss Milan? I thought she had left the stage. She had. But now, well, London loves a tragedy. And if the great Cora has vanished for good, the city will need someone to fill the void, won't it? Indeed, Poirot said quietly. And so, the curtain rises again. Only the stage remains the same. Back at our flat, Poirot sat in silence for some time, gazing out the window into the fog. Finally, he spoke. Hastings, do you know what troubles me most? I shook my head. It is not the disappearance, it is the timing. Cora was no fool. She would not vanish without purpose. And yet, just as she prepares to retire, just as her rivals gather, she disappears. Not before her triumph, but after. You think she staged it herself? Poirot steepled his fingers. No, but I believe she saw the final act of her life as a performance and someone close, rewrote her ending. He stood and retrieved the photograph from the side table, the one that had arrived late. He flipped it over, studied the inscription once more. Look here, Hastings, for memory's sake. That is not something one writes if one expects to return. Then you think? I think, mon ami, Poirot said grimly, that we are no longer looking for a missing diva. We are searching for a killer with a perfect pitch. Chapter 6. Curtain Fall. It was 2 days later when the body was found, but it was not Madame Cora Lyle. We were in the drawing room of our flat. Poirot, carefully trimming a lavender sprig and muttering about the chaos of English floristry, when the doorbell rang. I answered it to find a red-faced constable who'd clearly run the distance. Message from Chief Inspector Jasper. Immediate. Like. Poirot accepted the note with a little bow and scanned it. His eyes, already sharp, narrowed still further. Come, Hastings, he said. The performance is not over yet. It seems we have reached the intermission. We were taken to a narrow house off Gower Street, a quiet place better suited to scholars than to scandal, but scandal had come nonetheless. A body lay slumped across a parlor settee, draped in a silken shawl. It was Julian Falk. His expression was oddly peaceful, though the pistol near his right hand suggested otherwise. A single shot had done the work, clean through the heart. On the table beside him was a half-empty brandy glass and a letter addressed in precise script to Detective Hercule Poirot. Poirot opened it without ceremony. To Monsieur Poirot, who always sees too much. I can no longer carry the burden. I loved her, but she belonged to no man. I watched her disappear from me long before she vanished from the world. Please do not judge me too harshly. Julian Falk. Open and shut, I said, arms folded. Guilt, love, suicide. Don't often get confessions that neat. But Poirot was frowning. No, my friend, he said softly. This is too neat, too framed. He turned abruptly toward the fireplace. Hastings, the photograph there, propped on the mantel. I stepped closer. It was the same image we'd seen before. Cora in evening dress, eyes half-lidded with drama. But now, something new. A smear of ink, no, soot, on the corner. Poirot's fingers danced around it. This photograph has been moved. Recently. The dust does not lie. He pointed to the floor. And here, an ash, fresh. But Julian Falk did not smoke, nor is there a pipe or cigarette in the room. I raised a brow. You're saying it was staged? I say, replied Poirot, that our Mr. Falk was silenced, not by his conscience, but by someone else's plan. We returned. Home under gray skies. Poirot's mind seemed to race in silence, though he did not speak until we had crossed the threshold, and he had adjusted his bow tie, as though truth required proper attire. There is one detail that no longer fits, Hastings, he said. You recall the aria Ivy Milan rehearsed? Yes, the one written by Cora, but never performed. Precisely. It was said to be new. But I made inquiries this morning. That melody was composed years ago. And yet Miss Milan claimed to have received it only a week before the disappearance. Delivered by hand, she said. I blinked. From whom? She claimed a note was attached. For your voice, now that mine is gone. But the handwriting? I checked it against the letter Julian Falk left. Identical strokes. He turned to face me. So either Cora is alive and writing, or someone forged. Both letters, one to inspire, the other to condemn. And you think the same person wrote them? I think, he said carefully, that someone is playing the part of composer, dramatist, and now murderer. That evening we received a visitor, Miss Ivy Mlan. She arrived unannounced, trembling in a cloak too fine for the weather and eyes too bright for morning. I had to come, she said, stepping into the parlor. I read about Julian. It's awful. But it isn't true, is it? What is not true, mademoiselle? Poirot asked. That he killed himself? Or that he killed her? There was silence. Poirot gestured for her to sit. Tell me, Miss Milan, where were you the night Madame Lyle disappeared? She hesitated. I was at rehearsal, preparing for the private concert. I left early, around 10. Can anyone confirm that? Her face tightened. I don't know. Perhaps Lord Wincham. He arrived as I was leaving. And did you speak? A pause. Briefly, he offered me a drink. I declined. Poirot nodded. One final question. Where did you obtain the music for the aria? Her voice was thin. It came in an envelope, no return address, just the score and the note. Poirot leaned forward, eyes suddenly blazing. You are a fine singer, mademoiselle. But even the finest of voices cannot always disguise fear. If you are being threatened, or if you have made a grave mistake, now is the time to speak. Her mouth opened, closed. Then, in a whisper, I didn't kill her. I swear to you. But I think I know who did. Poirot stood. Bon. That, mademoiselle, is the first true note we've heard all week. Chapter 7. The Final Aria. It was near midnight when Ivy Mlan left our flat, more composed than when she arrived, but still with that haunted look one sometimes sees in women who have brushed too close to ambition or death. Poirot stood in the window after she'd gone, his hands clasped behind his back. She is frightened, he said at last. And she is telling the truth, at least most of it. But who is she protecting? I asked. Falk is dead. Cora is presumed, well, vanished. But if not Falk and not Ivy, Poirot turned. Then someone who has remained just outside the spotlight. Not the singer, not the lover, but someone who understood how to orchestrate the drama. I frowned. You mean Lord Wincham? He did not answer directly. Instead, he moved to his writing desk and opened a slim leather folio. Inside was the forged note that had accompanied the aria, Ivy's mysterious score. Poirot placed it beside Falk's suicide letter. The strokes are the same, the ink even. But more interesting is what is missing. He pointed. There is no watermark on the paper, no maker's mark, which tells us it was bought not from a stationer, but from a theater prop house or an amateur's collection. Both letters were written to be found. A knock interrupted us. Inspector James entered, trench coat still dusted with rain. He looked tired, irritable. You wanted that background on Wincham, he said, tossing down a file. There's no smoking gun. War record clean. Investments in theater. Generous but modest. He's had some debts, but nothing desperate, though. Poirot's eyes lit up. Ah, the though. Always important. James nodded. Though his name did come up once, An anonymous tip years ago. A singer's disappearance in Paris. Unsolved. That sharpened the room like a knife. Ivy named him, I said slowly. She said he offered her a drink the night Cora vanished. Poirot tapped the folder. Then we must ask, what sort of man remains so devoted to fallen stars? Who preserves them in portraits, revives their lost areas, and surrounds himself with echoes of brilliance? I began to understand. You think he preserves them permanently? Poirot didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the telephone. Get me Lord Wincham, if you please. Tell him we must speak with him immediately. At his residence. No, not tomorrow. Tonight. The house was quiet. A hush of velvet and oil portraits. Wincham greeted us in a robe of maroon silk, a glass of brandy in one hand. He seemed unsurprised. Ivy came to see you, he said. I suppose she's afraid of shadows. Poirot's expression was unreadable. She is afraid of truth, my lord, and perhaps of what you might do to bury it. Wincham smiled faintly. You have theories. Monsieur Poirot, I have facts. You were the last person to see Ivy the night of the disappearance. You had reason to hate Julian Falk, the man Cora nearly left her husband for, and you were the only person who knew the full schedule that evening, which doors were locked, which servants dismissed. Wincham sipped his brandy. And motive? Poirot paused. You did not love Cora, but you loved what she was. A relic, a myth. You made her into a symbol, and then could not bear to watch her age, to fade, to move on. You wanted to keep her in a perfect light. And when she said she was retiring, truly this time, and taking her voice and her legacy out of your gallery, Wincham laughed once. A hollow sound. I gave her everything, he said. Introduced her to critics, hosted her shows, shielded her from ruin. And she was ready to vanish into the Riviera and let her memory rot in cheap memoirs and some tawdry marriage to a tenor with bad vowels. Poirot stepped forward. So you staged her final curtain. You lured her to a private rehearsal, drugged the wine. It was quick, I hope. She died in the one place she still felt adored, Wincham said softly. On stage. There was a silence. Inspector. James, who had entered quietly behind us, spoke from the shadows. And Falk? Wincham sighed. He came too close. He began asking questions. She had confided in him, said she feared someone was following her. He told Ivy. And Ivy told me. Poirot's voice was quiet. And so, another final act. Wincham raised his glass one last time. Cora would have understood. She lived for endings. James stepped forward, cuffs in hand. We stood in silence as the sun rose over Kensington. The city, ever unaware, continued to hum. She never stood a chance, I said. Poirot nodded. No, because she was no longer a woman to him. She was a performance. And performers, to men like Wincham, are not allowed to bow out. Only to die beautifully. And Ivy, she will be safe now, he said. She gave him the benefit of doubt, as many women do. But she knew. She sang the aria, but she never liked how it ended. He looked up at the pale sky. The theater is closed, he said softly. The curtain has fallen. Epilogue. Cora's last note. It was weeks before the full truth emerged, pieced together from fragments Poirot had long suspected, and confessions extracted not by force but by silence, scrutiny, and that relentless whisper of guilt which visits the defeated in the darkest hours. Cora had died the night she vanished. That much was certain, but it was not murder in the traditional sense. There were no bruises, no broken bones, no gasping struggle. She had trusted him. The rehearsal had ended early. Wincham had offered her a nightcap, as he often did when she was too weary to face the adoring crowd outside the theater's back door. She was tired. She was finished, not just with the evening, but with the whole performance of being Cora Lyle, the dazzling soprano, the phantom in feathers. She told him so that night, in words plain and without flourish. She would marry Julian. She and Lionel, her estranged husband, were to formally separate. The doctor had agreed quietly, with an air of resignation. She and Julian would move to the coast. She would open a music school. No more concerts, no more costumes. Wincham smiled, poured the wine, and spoke about her legacy. The poison was tasteless. She never knew. She collapsed softly into the cushions of the old chaise in the green room, one hand curled beneath her chin. Peaceful. Eternal. Wincham did not panic. He had prepared. The theater was closed to the public. The stagehands had been dismissed. He waited. And when the time was right, he carried her to the trunk room beneath the main stage, the old prop cellar, no longer in use, and locked it from the outside. He would visit her every night for a week, leaving flowers. He told no one. It was, in his twisted way, a shrine. By the time the authorities found her body, after Poirot directed them to the theater's undercroft, she was still in her rehearsal gown, a faded scarf tied around her throat, in her hand, clutched still after. Death was a pressed pansy, a flower associated with remembrance. Poirot believed Wincham had placed it there. Dr. Lionel Crispin neither fled nor fought. He merely folded. He confirmed that he and Cora had been effectively estranged for over a year. Their marriage, in his words, existed only in legal form and public convenience. He knew of Julian Falk, and perhaps more surprisingly, he accepted the inevitable. He inherited nothing. Cora had revised her will only weeks prior, leaving the majority of her estate to fund a music scholarship for women of limited means. "I was never in love with her voice," Crispin said before being dismissed from questioning. "Only with her silence." He retired quietly to a coastal village in Devon. We never heard of him again. Julian Falk was buried beside Cora by her instruction. Ivy Milan sang at the memorial, not the infamous aria, but a quiet traditional ballad. No orchestra, no spotlight. Poirot and I sat at the back of the chapel. He removed his hat only once, during the silence that followed the final note. Outside, Ivy found us. "She was tired," she said simply. "She wanted to be remembered for her voice, not her vanishing." Poirot nodded. "And now she shall be." Ivy handed him something, an envelope yellowed at the edges. "She wrote this to me the week before she died. I didn't show it before. I thought it might shame her. But I think she'd rather be known. Truly. Known than mythologized." Poirot opened it later that evening. It was brief. "My dear Ivy, I see in you the hunger I once had, the fire. Let it burn brightly, but don't let anyone else light it for you. They'll try. They always do. I'm leaving the stage, but not because I have nothing left to give, only because I choose to stop giving it away. Yours in music, C." As the final notes fade into silence, Hercule Poirot unmasks Lord Wincham as the architect, of Cora Lyle's tragic end. Obsessed with preserving her eternal myth, he silenced her voice, and that of her lover, Julian Falk. Where the music ended concludes with justice served, yet echoes of obsession lingering like a forgotten area. We hope this descent into Edwardian intrigue has enthralled you, dear listeners. Did you suspect the patron's dark devotion, or were you misled by the lover's stage lament? Share your thoughts below. If Where the Music Ended has gripped you, please like and subscribe to Cafe Tales for more tales of suspense. Thank you for joining us, and until our next tale, may your nights be filled with intrigue and your days with clarity.